Death, torture, and forced recruitment on an industrial scale. A new Human Rights Watch report accuses the Rwanda-backed M23 rebel group of abducting thousands of people across eastern DR Congo, including children as young as 12, and holding them in brutal conditions where beatings, starvation, and executions were commonplace. Former detainees have described overcrowded camps and mass graves, with Human Rights Watch warning that hundreds may have already died as the conflict deepens further. Joining me here on set is Clémentine de Montjoye, senior researcher at Human Rights Watch, one of the lead reporters of this report. Let me just start off by saying thank you so much, Clémentine, for joining us here in Paris from your base, where you have been speaking to over 100 of these testimonies, of these accounts. And I just want to understand what exactly is new in this report that may have even shocked you.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me. So this report was the result of a year-long investigation. As you said, we interviewed over 100 people who were forcibly recruited and taken to these camps. And we knew that these forced recruitment operations were taking place. We had been hearing about operations including large-scale sweeps where sometimes hundreds of people were being rounded up and taken in trucks away for recruitment. But the stories that we heard from people who had been to these two camps, Rumangabo and Chanzu, are truly shocking in their brutality. And for that reason, we actually did a number of research missions to interview as many people as possible in order to corroborate the findings and corroborate the stories that we were hearing. It started from the way that people were detained. Sometimes we spoke with students who were on their way to university and stopped at a checkpoint, and before they knew it, were loaded onto trucks to go to one of the camps. People were taken from churches, from schools, from hospitals, from their homes, or they were lured to meetings under false pretenses, and sometimes the doors closed and they were forced onto trucks to the camps. Once in the camps, there were two, one focused on combatants and police, the other for civilians and militia fighters. People were subjected to horrific, life-threatening conditions. Everyone we interviewed described being in a near constant state of thirst, of having to sometimes drink water from puddles on the ground or try and lick rainwater from leaves to survive. People who were considered to have committed small disciplinary errors or falling out of line, trying to get a bit of extra food, were beaten brutally, and people also described seeing executions. Some of the worst stories and the most shocking stories we heard came from people that were held in a detention cell in Rumangabo, where people said that they were severely overcrowded to the point of not being able to lie down and were barely given any food or water. And I interviewed people who were held in these cells, as well as people who were in charge of bringing the small amounts of water and food that they were getting, and described pulling out sometimes 10, 15 or 20 bodies of people who had died. We used 3D modeling to try and see, based on the mensurations of the cells that we identified on satellite imagery, to estimate how people could have fit in a building of this size. And even with the most conservative numbers, it was very clear that people were so packed that they couldn't lie down on these cells. And to give you an example, we interviewed people who, after they were released from the cells to begin a training cycle in November, said that dozens of people died just from the exhaustion and the state that they were in from months of detention in the cells.
It literally sounds like an analogy between what happened now and what we heard about the transatlantic slave trade and how slaves used to be kept on those ships. It has almost that feeling. There were children involved as well. And I wonder, was this commonplace in what you saw and in many other of your reports, or have you found something new with the way that the children were being recruited?
So there were indeed a lot of children that were taken to the other training camp called Chanzu. And you have to remember, in Congo, there's a long history of child recruitment and forced recruitment by armed groups, including previous armed groups that have benefited from significant support from Rwanda. And it's really part of this cycle of abuse that we continue to document. Children in the camps were forced to carry out forced labor, military exercises, learn how to use weapons, and even in some cases were selected to beat up other detainees and kind of serve as almost proxy guards for M23's leadership.
Now, it's not just M23, as you mentioned, Rwanda, and you've got explicit evidence now from these testimonies. We hear about how Rwanda has backed M23 in the past. Now, you can say for sure with these testimonies, there is so much concrete evidence. Speak to me on that point.
Yeah, absolutely. It was very clear from our interviews that Rwandan fighters were very much part of the centers. People identified on satellite imagery Rwandan positions or the location where the Rwandan fighters were based. They said they recognized them because some of them had RDF, Rwanda Defense Force insignia on their uniforms or on their boots, sometimes the Rwandan flag. Some of them even spoke about going back to Rwanda for the weekend to see their families. The teaching was done often in English and Kinyarwanda, which are the two main languages of Rwanda. So it's very clear that Rwanda plays a key role in the M23's support, but also in the abuses that we are documenting. And Human Rights Watch has come to the conclusion that there is an occupation under international law, and that means because of Rwanda's effective control over M23 and their role in the abuses, Rwanda could be held criminally liable for what is happening in these camps and in other parts of areas under M23 control.
Possibly held liable for war crimes, I wonder. And I mean, on that note, is there a final message that you think the international community should really take from this report?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the aspects of all of the mediation and peace efforts that have been ongoing that is missing is any real accountability. We've called for investigations to be launched for possible crimes against humanity and for the war crimes that we have documented. And there needs to be stronger action, including from countries within the European Union that have a long history of standing up for justice to ensure that those responsible are held to account.
Clémentine de Montjoye, thank you so much. And again, thank you for bringing this report to light here. Very much an in-depth analysis of what happened in 2025 under the M23 there in the Eastern DR Congo.